As I studied more and more using my intelligence as an evangelical, but also praying about it, I became convinced that the New Testament Gospels were not written by eyewitnesses or by people who knew eyewitnesses.
Are you asking me, is there evidence that the apostles did not write the New Testament? Well, yeah, because the writers of the Christian Bible don't claim to be disciples.
But scholars nowadays almost all reject the view. Who scholars? Muslim scholars? Jewish scholars? Hindu scholars? No. Christian scholars. Christian scholars of the highest eminence. They say that Matthew didn't write Matthew.
Hey everybody, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were all written anonymously and almost certainly not by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
So who wrote the Gospels? Many skeptics want to claim that the Gospels were originally written anonymously, and that it wasn't until the latter half of the 2nd century that the early church put the names of the Gospels on them to give them authority. I find that hypothesis implausible, and I find the skeptics' confidence in it far exceeds what the evidence indicates. So let's take a look at the evidence to see which hypothesis is more reasonable. So first, I want to start with our manuscript evidence. So every ancient manuscript that we have in our possession that has survived with the title intact has the correct title for the gospel. We do not possess a single document that we know is anonymous, nor do we possess a single manuscript that has a different author attributed to the gospel. Now, to quote a famous German New Testament scholar and historian, Martin Hengel, he says, "It is inconceivable that the Gospels could circulate anonymously for up to 60 years, and then in the 2nd century suddenly display unanimous attribution to certain authors. If they had originally been anonymous, then surely there would have been some variations in the 2nd century attributions." So Hengel concludes that the 4 Gospels were never written anonymously. Next, we can look at the early testimony of our church fathers within the 2nd century to show a unanimous and unbroken chain of custody that clearly establishes the authorship of the Gospels. So I'm going to mention some of them. So we have Papias of Hierapolis, who's writing around AD 125. We have Saint Irenaeus of Lyons, writing around 180 AD. We have Clement of Alexandria, writing around 180 AD. And then we have Tertullian, writing around 200 AD. Oh, and I also want to mention that there's our earliest canon list called the Moratorium Fragment, which lists out 22 of the 27 books in our New Testament, written around 170 to 180 AD. All 5 of these sources from the 2nd century are unanimous that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the authors or the sources of the 4 Gospels. Now, if you were to plot all of these early church fathers on a map, what you would find is we have a wide geographical attestation throughout the ancient Roman world that has a consistent tradition and testimony of gospel authorship. And lastly, if we were to just think about it, if the early church's objective was to put apostles or disciples or a name to give it authority within the early church, why would they attribute Mark and Luke? Why not pick, I don't know, Thomas, Philip, Andrew? Why not Peter, right? Why would you pick 2 insignificant Greek characters who were barely mentioned in the New Testament, who never knew Jesus, who never heard Jesus, who never walked with Jesus? Why would you attribute their names to try to give it, quote unquote, authority? So, when we look back at the evidence, we have a unanimous testimony from our early church fathers within the 2nd century. We have undisputed manuscript evidence, which some of it dates to within the 2nd century. And then lastly, we have the implausibility of picking Mark and Luke as gospel names to attribute authority. we clearly see that the evidence indicates that the Gospels were never originally anonymous. Now, I like to ask people, if you are a reasonable person, then follow the evidence where it leads.